I'm here at a beaver dam in the Pennsylvania State Game Lands in Midland, PA. And there's a lot of people who say that certain things were not once native to the bulk of Pennsylvania, especially as far as aquatic plants and grassland plants and other things that need an open area. I just wanted to show just what happens when beavers build a dam. Now this one's been here for several years, actually probably decades, and you can see all the trees that they didn't eat are more or less dead from the flooding that they created. It's actually a little higher than it was last time I was here. It wasn't quite this close to the road. And the dam itself's kind of become a living wall here. It's been here long enough that you've got cattails, and I think these are mostly red willow, which is actually a type of dogwood growing in the dam itself. Is kind of horseshoe shaped here. See the overflow here. It's their lodge out there in the middle. Every now and then you sneak down here and you'll hear them slap their tail, but it's mostly frozen over right now, so they're not out swimming on the surface yet or anything. But, you know, I've heard PhD botanists saying that, you know, pond lilies and other stuff had to have been introduced here by man when they made man-made lakes, and, you know, prairie remnants are also a myth and whatever, but just look at what these guys have done. I mean, obviously this isn't the most natural of environments to begin with. Being here in the game lands, they maintain it for deer and such. There's another one down there on the other side of the road that is just kind of swampy at this end, but there's another lower beaver dam. Maybe I'll take some footage of that later. But they create huge open areas that taper off into various types of wetlands depending on what was there before they flooded it out. Create lots of open space because, you know, the trees die. This is where the, you know, your painted turtles, etc., had habitat in the middle of the state prior to the extermination of the beavers. Possibly also part of how the prairie remnants got here, if they were a little bit on the damper side, because, you know, they create a wet meadow grassland type environment. Eventually they run out of trees that they like. I've seen one place before where up near a place called Lolita, up in the middle of the state, there used to be a beaver dam, and the beavers abandoned it when basically it all went back to conifers because they ate all the trees they liked. When these things are left, they slowly, you know, they revert to forest eventually. They turn to grassland, you know, wet meadows, marshes. Eventually the water will incise its way down somewhere in the dam, and most of it drains, and eventually, you know, you end up with this open area, and that's how the forest opened up. And this was a constant ongoing process. They created these slow, sun-filled, muddy areas here, and then they abandoned them and they went back to woodland, etc., and it was a constant mosaic, and the turtles and whatever else just moved back and forth between them. One dried up, they moved on to the next one. You see, they tended to do them in chains. As they expand, they, you know, some of the relatives move up or downstream and find another spot, and, you know, well within walking distance of a turtle. It's just the same shame that some people get stuck in their point of view. They really don't see how things were, or they look at how somebody described something, you know, in the golden age of the naturalist and the botanist, which is basically post-Civil War, and beavers were mostly wiped out by the dawn of the 1800s. at least in this part of the country. People were already chasing them all the way to the Rocky Mountains to find them. You wouldn't have had trappers out in the Rocky Mountains if they could have found them in Pennsylvania or New York. You know, a few did survive there, but, you know, not enough numbers to support trappers anymore. And people are looking back at that point in time, and the way things were described in, you know, 1870 is, you know, people have been modifying the land for a couple centuries at that point in time. Just a little glimpse of what the place was like. Used to be probably almost every creek in Pennsylvania had at least one of these, probably more. I'm actually surprised since the last time I've been here. This dam's actually abandoned, and you can see where the water's flowing through a breach right there. So this gives a good idea of it starting to revert back. You got basically some wet meadow, and I mean that's going to go back to being a little piece of grassland there, and eventually the shrubs and then the trees will take it back, but kind of shows you that they did leave the open space, and it did turn into, you know, ground that theoretically a bison could walk around on and eat a little bit of grass. Still see that stump out there in the middle with the tooth marks on it. But yeah, that's the old dam right there. You can see the breach in it. It's all the way over to about here. You can see water's moving a little bit swifter here, cutting its way through the silted up mud bottom, and eventually that'll go back to being your typical stony bottomed Pennsylvania Appalachian Plateau creek. But for a while it flattened out into this nice wetland here that, you know, I'm assuming now that this is draining, some of these cattails are gonna give way to the grass, and away we go. You can kind of see the upper pond there and the crossover road I was standing on before. But over there, like I said, the game land's not the wildest place. You can see where they kind of keep that mowed to make it a field. Sometimes there's places where they even plant corn or millet or something out here just so they got a place where they can release pheasant for the hunters. But you can still kind of get the gist of what happens. Here's another little piece of wetland created by the beavers over here. So it's a constant ebb and flow. This happened on all the creeks everywhere in the state at one point in time. So you had your mountain trout streams turning into an open sunny pond for panfish, and then going back to a fast moving trout stream over and over again as it alternated through these dams, and you know, these provided habitat for all your more slow water flora and fauna. It's open, it's sunny, it's slow, it's warmer, and, you know, tumbling over rocks and going through the shade and having some more, you know, base flow groundwater going into it at about 50 degrees. It would cool back down, and just over and over again. It was a much more complex patchwork. Little bonus next to the beaver dams here. You can see these little things up at the top here. You can see a couple of the husks left on it. This is an American hazelnut. Corylus americana, I believe. You can see, if I can get this little bastard towards me here. Here's the husk where the nut would have sat right up in there. And those are the flowers up there coming out. They come out real early in the spring like this. So that's the flowers. And then eventually later in the year, you'll have nuts on this, and if it's anything like the ones growing at my house, or actually my parents' house, look, try to still this up here. Yeah, they're not really opened up yet, but they're definitely out. And you know, you can grow a few of these in your backyard, but if there's any squirrels in your neighborhood, you'll never get one nut. At least that's been my experience. And then we got some wonderful invasive something or other over there climbing on this tree. Yeah. Moved over a little bit. I can tell by the bark on it because there's so many of them around here. That's an Oriental Bittersweet. Going up there all loaded in berries. And that's just an oak tree with a bunch of galls on it. Don't know why they get those galls, but they get a bunch of them. So what the stream looks like a little bit down from that last beaver dam. Just to kind of show you, this is about what it was. It's a little bit high right now because the snow's melting. It's like slush fest out here, but you can see the rocky bottom. It's a little bit above its banks right now, so it looks like it's right up to the grass on the edges, but that's not where it's normally at. But yeah, normal stony bottom, the little trickle of a creek is what made all that up there, so just puts it in perspective. As I stand here in the middle of all the invasive bullshit mixed with the other stuff. A wonderful multiflora rose right here. And there and everywhere. It's a beech tree with its leaves still on over there. Just a little one, but yeah, gotta love the Multiflora rose. Do a little bit of winter identification here. Right here we have a black cherry next to a sassafras. The sassafras trees, I'm not even sure how people identify them. I grew up next to them. I can often pick them out from 25 yards away and not tell you what I'm even seeing that makes them different. So there's almost like a texture. You can see the way the branches are kind of twisted and tangly. In the upper part of the trunks even, they tend to have little waves. There's one a little bit farther out there that's got that branch hanging out over the trail. You can kind of see that about halfway up it starts getting that sort of twistiness to it. There's also the bark here. And, you know, the bark's quite distinct in the way that it kind of splits. There's other trees kind of similar, but just the overall combination of the bark and the you know, the growth form seems to make it stand out. The one next to it here, try to get a little closer here. Zoom out, or zoom out a little bit. Get a little closer here. I'm killing myself. But the cherry, it grows smooth bark whenever it's young that has these lenticles going across, almost like a birch. And the bark kind of splits and you can still see these pieces. The only thing really close to this would be a cherry birch. All your other birches are much lighter in color. And also a telltale sign is these things tend to have lots of dead branches and are often infested with carpenter ants. Which is probably why we don't make millions of dollars on lumber around here, because black cherries are a dime a dozen around here, but one that's significant size without being at least partially hollowed out with ants is kind of rare. Trying to see, I can't really see any of the smaller branches on the sassafras, but they usually have like a smooth sort of reddish bark on them. See what else is easy to ID over here. Whoop! Down the trail there's an ash or a beech tree. They tend to hold their leaves and they've got smooth gray bark. Ugh. And another easy one is over there. See if I can zoom in on him. I don't feel like walking down there. But you got the shagbark hickory down there. You can tell because the bark is shaggy. That's kind of distinctive and easy to tell. Zoom out a little bit. Zoom out all the way. Yeah, he's got a little bit of height to him. He gets kind of tall. The cherries can get tall. There's a fairly tall cherry there. And like I said, I can pick some of these trees out from a distance better than others just because I grew up with them and they're way familiar to me. There was another, where the hell did it go? There was another shagbark up there. I'll walk down here a little bit and take a closer look at the beech. These are kind of moving in from squirrels from somewhere else. Usually you see beech close to each other. Oh, there's one of the shagbarks over there. But, as I said, they keep their leaves, so they're easy to identify in winter. And it's kind of damp, so it looks a little darker, but you can see the gray bark. And even as a big tree, they've got smooth gray bark. And people like to carve initials in them because of that. Don't see too much else that's that easy. We got some oaks. The maples and the ash tend to have smooth grayish bark when they're young, but then it splits up when they're older. I see a couple of younger maples around here, and most of the ash got the ash borers in this area, so don't really find too many. And here's another sign that that's a hickory tree. You can see the bark there, and when you look on the ground, you can see the husks of a gazillion nuts all over the place. Oh well, moving on. Here's an ash tree. Easy to tell from a distance because you can kind of get the idea what it looked like when it was alive. But these little holes right here, that's the telltale sign of the ash borer. Bark's starting to come loose because the borers eat the cambium layer underneath. Seen some of these falling over, and you'll see all these, it almost looks like somebody carved designs on the exterior of the wood after the bark falls off, because where they went and just mowed through that cambium layer. And of course, this is good for wintertime identification, is stems that are hairy creeping up trees tend to be poison ivy. Might be Virginia creeper, but better safe than sorry. Another tree, this is a white oak. See the bark. Bark's not all that distinctive, holds on to its leaves. And you can also see some of these leaves at the base here. So generally there's two kinds of oak, red and white. This is definitely a white, has the lobed leaves. Some of these things have leaves that don't have that big of lobes on them, but if the tips are rounded, they're in the white oak family. If they're pointed, they're in the red oak family. But then you get weird things like chestnut oaks that don't really have your typical form, but you know, they still get classified in one family or the other. Another thing to point out, you can see that tree over there. Actually, just kind of looking at the forest itself. These trees are predominantly younger than I am. Obviously, this guy looks like he's probably a bit older. Some of these other ones, but a lot of times they cut these forests for lumber, and they left certain trees to repopulate the forest. Now this guy right here, you can tell compared to some of these other guys that are tall and straight and not very wide, that's the way they grow when they're growing in forest conditions. You know, they're trying to compete for the light. He's trying to get up above this guy. Now you go back to this big guy over here and how wide he is. He grew when this was either scrubland or a farmer's field, because he's kind of proportionately shorter and wider. Generally, that's how you can kind of tell. And a lot of times in these forests, you'll see all these forest-grown trees, like you see that guy right there. Tall and thin, no branches near the bottom, goes all the way up there, and then he starts branching out. He's been just putting all his energy into going up so he can get up there and get his little chunk of the light. But then you look at some of these, even this tree here that's closer, this guy was definitely taller than everybody around him, and probably didn't start dropping these lower branches until other things started growing close to him and shading out those lower branches. This was at least more open savanna-like at one point in time, because these oak trees definitely didn't grow under forest conditions. Here I am closer to this older tree. He's got to be at least 30 inches diameter breast height here. He's an old timer, but you can see he's got a scar right there. He's had some huge branches comparatively low. So like I said, that means he didn't have to go up to get light. He could just get up above, you know, probably taller grasses or whatever, because, you know, even a meadow can have things 6, 8, 10 feet tall that are just herbaceous plants. But all you had to do is get above those, and then he could just stretch out and suck up all the light that he wanted. And you can see that branch there. It looks like it grew out and then as the other trees around it got taller, he sent a sucker shoot straight up. Looks like a tree growing on top of a tree right there. But yeah, you can see there's that dead branch there. Some of these things died as it started to get shadier towards his base, but he's got another pretty good nub right there where there used to be a large branch. So just a little bit of detective work on, you can see more of the branches here. Exactly who grew where and when. It's another neat thing about growing trees from scratch. You see what the hell they look like in 10 or 20 years, and you start realizing that, you know, a lot of these trees, yeah, they're only a couple of decades old. They're not some ancient forest. Another easy to identify winter tree, and the birds sure seem to like it, is the staghorn sumac. And it's one of the last things with little berries or seeds for the birds to eat, so the birds are having a feast here right now. And contrary to popular belief, they are kind of sort of half-ass related to the poison sumac, but they're not poisonous. You can tell these, I can't really, I'll zoom in, see if that helps. But yeah, they got a little bit of fuzziness to them. Fuzzy means it's staghorn. If I can zoom in on the birds there. It's just looking at me. Tell by the call that at least some of these guys are robins, even though the one that I saw closer up was a catbird. So the robins are back. I don't think they're all robins, but I definitely hear a robin calling in there. Yep, that's robins calling. But that's that. And there they go. You can get a little closer look at the bark on them. The bark's not too impressive. The jaggers are our old friend, the Multiflora rose, poking through. Another Oriental Bittersweet climbing up through there. The sumac's got this sort of lenticulated bark here. These guys tend to be hollow inside too. I've heard they're good for making things like Native American style flutes. And you can also use the berries, obviously earlier in the year than this, to make sort of a lemonade type drink. Like I said, they get a bad rap because there is something called a poison sumac, but they're not poisonous. And even the poison sumac, it's not poisonous, it's an allergic reaction just like poison ivy. Yeah. Found one that I could actually pull down and get closer up. You can see the fuzz on it. Fuzz makes it staghorn sumac because it looks like the velvet on a deer's antlers. And these are little berries that the birds are picking apart, because this is the bad time of year for things. The fall fruits are gone and the spring stuff hasn't really come up yet, so late February, early March is probably the famine time most years. It's been a warm winter this year though. Easily identified non-native tree, that's a Norway spruce. You can tell by the way it's kind of got the droopy hanging like Spanish moss style branches when they get big. This guy's interesting. They call it dogbane mostly. You can tell by the seed pods here. And these things, they'd come along and they'd pick these and they'd use them for fiber to make stuff. You can kind of soak them a little bit and break them up in the bark. Now, I'll see if I can break this one. Yeah, this is too crumbly. But it's got another name, Indian hemp. And the reason why they called it Indian hemp wasn't like you'll see on some websites where they say you can smoke the stuff like weed or something, but because it was actually a fiber plant that you can make rope and cloth from, just like hemp was grown for making rope and canvas originally. So, you know, rougher than cotton, but in some areas like this, it can be fairly readily available. In fact, I believe those are more of it right there, and there's probably a bunch of it around here that just hard to tell one stem from the other, except for the seed pods. But yeah, grow in fairly large quantities in the wild, and you could harvest it and make rope out of it. And over here, I can tell by the old seed pods there, that's a milkweed. And right next to the milkweed, I'm not sure if you can see it, that's a goldenrod with a gall on it. Goldenrods tend to get these galls. If it wasn't on a steep muddy hillside, I'd grab that one. But it's a survival thing. You find the last year's goldenrods with those galls, and inside that gall there's a little worm. Probably the best thing to do with the worm is actually kill it and eat it and get your protein that way, because it's a lot less effort to gather up a bunch of them and do that. But if you got some primitive fishing skills, it's a way to get bait in the middle of January. Find one of those little balls there, cut it open, find the worm, and put it on a hook or a gig and try your luck. You can tell by the seed heads, these are goldenrods here, but no galls on them. But it kind of gives you an idea. You can see some more over there. You can tell by these type of seed heads. There's several species, but they'll look somewhat similar with the seed heads. And from there you should be able to to find one every, I don't know, maybe 100 or so stalks. You can tell there's quite a few of them over there. Find one of them galls. And these all seem to be somewhat ailing. I believe they're Scots pine, actually. They're non-native planted tree. These ones are dead. These ones look a little bit better. Here's one a little bit closer up. Here's one of these galls. You can see a hole there, so maybe this guy already either got eaten by a bird or perhaps he emerged as a bug already. This might be more than a year old, but this would be the thing you would cut open looking for that worm there. And basically an insect lays an egg inside, and the plant forms like a scar tissue protective chamber around it, and the plant goes on with its life, but the insect gets to grow just sitting inside there, nursing off the juices of the plant, and you know, has a wall protecting it from predators, except for those with sharp little beaks that peck into them. And here's that gall. I figured I went this far down the rabbit hole, even if there's not an actual caterpillar inside. I cut it open to show you what it looks like. Maybe living in that little area right there, you'd see a little tiny caterpillar grub looking thing. And yeah, that's it. Usually they're completely covered over, wouldn't have any kind of a big hole in them unless either it got out on its own and turned into whatever insect, or something else poked a hole in there and ate them. This is just your, most people call it a black raspberry. It's Rubus something or other, I can't remember off the top of my head. But it also has these neat, very decorative looking purplish canes that get this sort of whitish bloom on it. It's thorny, not the worst thorniness on it, and it does have nice berries. So, someplace to remember for summer. Here's your more common. This is probably Rubus alleghaniensis. That's the common, as we call it, jaggerbush. They grow everywhere. They have blackberries, but they are thorny and a pain in the ass to walk through. Just more of the birds enjoying another staghorn sumac. Among them, the first robins of spring or the last robins of last year, one of the two. Sometimes they do overwinter. And here in one of these artificially tractor maintained fields in the game lands here, you got these sort of flat topped, purplish colored flower stems, for lack of a better way of putting it, with these umbels on top. Sometimes you get asters and such too, but I believe these ones with the darker colored stems are actually ironweed. Lots of ironweed and Joe Pye weed grows in this area. Also, we get some other interesting stuff, more of the goldenrods up in here too. Here's a close-up. Those oak galls on a branch that fell down. You don't know why they get them. Shingle oaks get them the worst, so I'm assuming just by the number of galls, this is a shingle oak. See, the tree's just loaded with them. And shingle oak's one of the weird ones that has, for lack of a better way to put it, leaf-shaped leaves. They're just sort of, yeah, in fact, you can see some hanging on right there. I mean, they're just sort of long oval with a little bit of a point at the end, and not really much else is, no real lobes or indentations or anything else on them. So, at any rate, a little closer look straight up at all them galls. Just a little note on engineering in general and the importance of proper backfill, and often like bentonite dams and things like that. You look right down through this hole in the road and you can see the water just going through the soil right past the pipe. The pipe's on the left there, and the water's just going through the ditch that they excavated to put the pipe in, and yeah, not the best construction. Yeah, just looking at the so-called Christmas fern, which is evergreen. There's another fern kind of mixed in here, which is also evergreen, but these guys kind of beat up here because they're on the side of the trail. This is your typical Christmas fern. Try to find one. They normally come to more of a point at the end. Yeah, like these guys up here. That's an entire one. And there's some ground pine or club moss, depending on what you want to call it up there. But they call them Christmas ferns because they're evergreen like a Christmas tree, I guess. But a whole bunch of it along the trail here. In the other game lands over in South Beaver Township now. Okay, here's a young sassafras. You can see the bark, the general thing here. But then you can see the smaller branches, how the smooth bark on the smaller branches is. And he's not really budding that much yet, but still see that same sort of weird kind of lumpy, wavy shape they can get. Although sometimes they can be straight for a while, but usually the top still has that weird multiple curve look to it. You can see it in the other ones here. Just a little vernal pool. Not much going on here. It's been a very warm winter, but yet there are other years where I have seen some activity already as far as spring peepers and or spotted salamanders or newts when there was still a little bit of snow on the ground, and you just got a little bit of a thaw for a day and they suddenly just come out. But apparently not this year. Maybe the groundhog was wrong. Two, I guess, teenage size red cedars. They're called red cedars because they get a reddish tinge a lot of the time in winter. And they'll have two types of needles. They'll have some really shaggy ones like these. And then as the foliage matures, in fact when they're seedlings they're all the jaggy stuff, it turns more scale-like as they get older. And it's all on the same tree. And I don't see any berries, but I'll get bluish berries, and the berries will persist long into the winter. And they also get these little gall-looking things. Sometimes these can be kind of wet and oozy looking in the summer. That is your cedar apple rust. I've got some on my mom's backyard that get this really bad because they're right next to a bunch of apple trees. There's another one over there hiding. It's kind of wild he's under a tree because he's really don't like shade. Just a quick shot at the landscape here. I'm on the trail, but you look off the side of the trail and it's just lumps and little divots. If you go off trail wandering around here, it's like an egg crate. It's easy to get lost because the form of the land is basically flat with all these egg crate looking mounds and little spaces between the mounds, because this all used to be strip mine, I believe. So And this is unusual because we're at the very northwest corner of Beaver County, so this area actually would have been glaciated. People argue with me about it all the time, but if you look at a map, it comes down all of Lawrence County and it cuts off a little area of Beaver County, and you know, I'm not the one who mapped it there. It's not like it obeys some sort of geopolitical boundaries that were set up by European settlers thousands of years later. When the glaciers came, they didn't see no boundaries. So yeah, this is the glaciated portion of Beaver County. They came through here and cleared stuff out a couple years back, and strangely just left it all. I guess they figured the deer like breaking their legs going through this shit, but that's another story. But looking at this bark right here, you can still kind of identify this. Not exactly your major hardwood species, and the bark's kind of peeling. It's not the perfectest, but these are aspen trees. Beavers love them. There's another one up there. They cut down these nice big aspen trees and just left them here to rot. I believe that nationwide they are actually the #1 source, or one of the top sources at least, of paper pulp. So it's a lot of rolls of toilet paper just rotting away on the hillside here. And you can see a little bit better as we're going down the trail a little bit more, this egg crate shaped mound. So you wander off the trail, it's just like a whole bunch of identical mounds just put together like an egg crate. Here's another one that's still standing. Actually, there's a couple of them. These are the poplars here, or aspen. Aspen poplar, same family. They're related to willows. There's some more back there. There are some quaking aspens around here, but I believe these ones here are big tooth. A little bit rougher bark on the big tooth. You can see at the bottom. They get a little bit bigger than that. They start getting more furrowed, whereas the quaking aspen, I think, is a little finer at the tips of the branches and not quite as rough on the bark. Very similar trees. I may be mistaken on these ones though. Another easy tree to identify. Looks kind of nondescript there, but as soon as you start going up and you start seeing that patchy bark, and then all the little dingle balls of seeds hanging up there, definitely an American sycamore. You have an odd scenario where you got a quaking aspen kind of leaning here. Not sure, doesn't seem to be quite dead, but you can see the bark's a little smoother than the other ones and comes to a little bit finer point. And because this thing still has leaves attached to it, you can see they're a little bit toothy, but they don't have the big teeth that give the big tooth aspen its name. I'll see if I can find a big tooth leaf around here somewhere for comparison. Well, found it and dropped it. Here's a big tooth aspen. It's a little bit chewed up, but you can see the bigger teeth along the margins there. It's really noticeable whenever they're green compared to now, but nice white pine. You can kind of tell by its shape, and he's kind of open grown here. I'm looking ahead. Yeah, this road's kind of an access road. It's supposed to be open to handicapped people on ATVs, but 2 semis could pass on that road. Yeah, the white pine, the needles are in bundles of 5. And they tend to have a little bit of a white stripe to the needles, which is why they got the name. But always remember 5 needles, and 5 letters in the word white, so kind of smoother bark on the branches, and it kind of gets scaly on the tree eventually. Finally reaching the point where I'm getting close to where I was headed. You can see right there, this tree was cut down by beavers. They don't really build dams out here, but some of these man-made ponds from whenever they were strip mining or whatever the hell they were doing out here back before it became game lands. See a bunch of them down over here. All done by beavers. And they just float them along in the water there and take them wherever they want them. Don't know why they didn't carry these ones away, but I'm sure they had their reasons. Maybe they just took the good parts. There's this big gash left from the strip mining or whatever the hell they were doing here. But notice the beavers kind of prune that. And up here in the shallow end, they make these little trails where they can stay submerged and float logs or get food or whatever. These little trails here is where they come in and out of the water. They like going up into these cattails. They also eat a lot of the cattails. They dig up the roots and eat them. You can see closer down on this the way those things were cut by their little teeth. This is kind of cool. They kind of made a barrier across the trail by accident. You can see where they chewed through that and then it fell over. I guess it fell in a different direction than they wanted and they left it there. Off the top of my head, I guess that's maple. Pain in the ass getting here. It's a little overgrown compared to the way it was last time I was here, but this was my goal. This little place right here is their midden. It almost looks like their lodge, but it's right up against the shore. And this is where they more or less piled up a lot of their half-eaten sticks. So you can see a lot of these used to be a lot better. This looks more like a waste pile now, but you can see all these sticks are chewed on. And there's one here, it's all nice and chewed at the end. And I've seen some where you can see the teeth marks the whole way down because they cut off branches and then they'll chew the bark off of it in the winter. So that's part of what they do. They cut things into manageable pieces and they drag it into a pile like this, and then in winter they don't have to go very far. Not sure how much I want to trust this going out on it. But here's a nice big one here. You can see the end there. And I don't see, you can see a little bit of chaw in there. But I've seen some that are just nothing but tooth marks end to end. Not as good as it used to be. People come down here and fish. Maybe somebody else has been snatching up the nice ones for walking sticks or something. There's a chair somebody left behind sitting there. Our nice fuzzy friend, the staghorn sumac. We have some of the narrow cattails. You can tell right away because their little seed pods look about half the size of the other ones. And yeah, I've been up in there. That's interesting too, but I can't get there from here. Usually, well, that right there, you can tell by the red color, it's the red willow, the is it Cornus racemosa, I think? Anyway, it's really a dogwood. They just call it red willow. And in a month or two, you'll see pussy willows all along this too. That's what a lot of these other little things are. Give you a little bit of a look out over here. This is the deep spot. It's probably, I don't know, 6-8 feet deep in the middle at least. Shallows up that end. Shallows up that end. I came in by those white pines over there. And then there's a little back channel that cuts out and goes out of here, and then it trickles off through the forest out that way. So this is just a big man-made pond from whenever they were digging over here before. See a nice hump over there. Maybe that's where they're living now. Used to be they were under a rock on the bank over there. They were actually dug into the bank. It wasn't a lodge out in the middle, but they may have changed.